Welcome to the Mindful Academy podcast with me, Jennifer Askey. I'm a professional certified coach and academic workplace consultant. On this podcast, I talk about doing well personally so that you can perform well professionally. I talk about intentional career planning and about how to get out of your own way and align yourself with success. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back to the Mindful Academy. I'm Jennifer Askey. I'm your coach. And today I'm going to be talking about being a department chair. And I'm grounding this in a collected, so an aggregated anonymous survey of my clients who are in chair roles, director roles, and other leadership roles. So a little background on this, that is anecdata, opinion pieces, and also some actual research data about trends in higher education and in higher education leadership. So something that we have been noticing in the demographic data over the last 20 years or so is the increasing feminization of the academy. So whether we're looking at undergraduate enrollments or graduate enrollments or incoming professors, there are more women than ever. Among the student ranks, female students tend to outstrip male students, and we're seeing increasing numbers of women enter the professoriate, even in traditionally male-dominated fields. Although things like engineering and it is still incredibly male-dominated, but when you get into the humanities and social sciences, we are seeing larger numbers of women tipping the ratios towards a higher percentage of women in these roles. Now, that is not reflected at the highest levels of senior university and college leadership, which are still all across North America overwhelmingly male. But what happens as we have an increased number of assistant professors who are women is that I see, and the literature bears me out, an increasing number of women who receive tenure, right, hit associate professor, and then are tapped for high-level, high-hour service positions and leadership positions like department chair or department head. So these roles, whether it's department chair or head or fellow of this, vice provost of that, director of this initiative, often come, and this is anecdotally, so this is very much my experience, but I think it will resonate with you. These often come with a really interesting and maybe even high potential portfolio, but zero authority and limited resources, right? So you take people who've been really high performers and you say, we need an energetic person with good spidey senses and a good moral compass to lead this initiative. Let's tap her. And the woman who gets tapped for this is flattered to be tapped, sees the potential, dives in, and then things grind to a halt. So whether I run into the scenario in my clients where they've been given a role that pretty much is a no-win situation, like, you want to lead, go go dull your teeth on this bone, my friend, or they realize that they've bitten off an enormous task. In order to do it well, it takes an enormous amount of time. And they find after a couple years that full professor creeps further and further and further away, right? So an increasing number of women at the associate rank with a high service burden who are finding it really challenging to get to full. So this, of course, has financial implications for those people, has reputational implications for those people, and is something worth noticing. And so given this population of high-performing women who are being tapped to, or even volunteering to take on leadership roles, and then figuring out, wow, what got me there isn't going to make me successful there, right? Or what got me here to this role is not going to continue to make me successful. I need new skills. I need something to shift in order to make this job doable for me. You're the people I'm talking to today. So first of all, And if that isn't you, don't go away, because this might be you next year, right? Or it might be a friend of yours, or it could be you in a couple years, or it might be your current department chair, right? So first, I'm going to talk about why this happens, why you may find yourself in this role as an associate professor, as a woman, in a leadership role and experiencing a certain degree of frustration. Okay, so why did you land this particular job? I'll just use chair as a synecdoche for any number of entry-level leadership positions in a university environment. There may be pressure, right? It might be your turn. I know departments that just rotate through, and when your turn comes up, you do it, whether the timing is right for you or not. There might be pressure from the dean's office that they want you in that role for particular reasons that serve the college or the faculty. You may also find yourself in this position because when the chair opened, you saw, oh, here is a way to have an impact on my department, right? Whether it's, you know, whatever sort of project you see at the department level that is either directed at students or directed at faculty or directed at integrating your department in new ways, like you may see, oh, I can have an impact here and I have good ideas and I want to implement them. Yes, please pick me because I have a plan, right? And that feels so good to see, like, wow, I have a plan, I have a vision, and I've been appointed in order to enact this vision together with my colleagues. I also have clients, and this I hear a lot, people, women who just, and this is not just women, right? This is women and men. I see the phenomenon more pronounced in my female colleagues. So that's who I'm speaking about in particular, but I think we can generalize this quite a bit. People who put their hand up willingly or unwillingly because they want the unit to be led according to a certain set of values, right? Whether that has to do with, you know, the role of the chair being to smooth the path for the professors so that they can get maximum work done, right? The chair as person running interference, or the chair as setting a tone when it comes to students, setting a tone when it comes to administration. Right? If there's this real values piece that you want to see enacted and you know you possess those values, and so you put your hand up and say, yes, I will do it because I will do it in this way that is resonant with my values, and that will make this a more pleasant and more aligned place for me to work, and hopefully for my colleagues as well. And then another way that I see women landing in this position is the chair role opens up and people look around. And if nobody's been tapped, or it isn't obviously somebody's turn, and there's going to be an internal competition for that, female faculty member looks to her left and to her right and says, I don't want these clowns running the department. I better do it. Now, that doesn't sound super friendly. I will acknowledge that. But you and I both know that has happened. Perhaps at your institution, perhaps on your hallway. But the awareness, and this is maybe connected to the values piece, maybe connected to the impact piece, that if you go into a leadership position and you take that role seriously, you can have one kind of beneficial impact on your department. And if you take that position and you take it for vanity motives, or for pet project motives, or to get out of teaching, or something super transactional, that may have a very different impact. And so people who have a sense of justice and doing the right thing, and this of course applies to both men and women, likely put themselves forward almost in an idealistic way. Like, let me do it because my heart's in the right place. And so I want to honor all of those reasons as valid reasons. And they're valid reasons because, well, you did them or somebody did them, and that makes them, they exist in real time and space, so they're a thing. And they're valid because leadership in higher education is a strange game. You do not go to graduate school to be a leader, right? You go to graduate school to get disciplinary knowledge and to show yourself proficient in disciplinary knowledge and to make a contribution to a field. You don't join a committee to become a leader. You join a committee to get a certain kind of work done. And so leadership in higher education is sort of catch as catch can. And so the people who self-identify very early on as wanting to become leaders, so wanting to be chair and then vice dean and then dean and then provost, those are, at least in my experience, a rarer brand of faculty member than the perhaps reluctant leader who finds herself or himself in this role because it was their turn or it was the right things to do. And now you have to figure out, what on earth do I do now? Because what is interesting about leadership in the academy is all of your training, whether it's pedagogical training or disciplinary and methodological training, is premised on there's a right way to do things, that logic and consistency and rationality and good prose and solid arguments carry the day. And what you may have noticed in your institutional context, and all of my clients have noticed this in one way, shape, or form, is that when it comes to the business of running a department or running a college or running a university, an incredibly well-crafted, well-reasoned argument may not win the day. And so your training as a disciplinary expert and what it means to lead in this very complex institutional environment are entirely different things. And let's say you were trained to lead because you have an MBA, right? Or some sort of business degree, which we associate with leadership in capitalist societies. I attend and read a great number of events on leadership and on team management and things like that. And it's all premised on a corporate model. And so I'm constantly having to translate, how would this scenario play out in a university? How does this play out in higher ed? And it's fascinating because, especially in Canada, staff, so non-academic staff, are unionized. All over North America, professors have tenure. They're not going anywhere, right? So the corporate model of, maybe some people get fired when they no longer align with your vision, or if people feel marginalized or feel like they're not making a contribution, they'll seek out new employment. That is so much rarer, vanishingly rare in the academy. And so the human assets that any university have, sure, they fluctuate as people retire and as new people come in, but it is not as dynamic a system as what we think of as like the poster child of a corporation, right? Universities are incredibly stable and incredibly conservative in the sort of small c sense of the word, where it's the same people for decades. And so your leadership and what you bring to bear in leadership has to take that into account. It's a far more interpersonal game and a far more directed inward at self-management game than I think some of the standard models for leadership out in the world would have us believe. Because we have to manage ourselves as leaders, right? Not to get emotionally hijacked and triggered, not to get overly frustrated and throw something out of the sandbox and pick up our toys and go home. If we hurt somebody or are hurt, right? Those ripple out for a really long time because nobody leaves, right? These are your colleagues for a really long time. And so it seems like the stakes, they either feel higher or they feel deeper somehow. So it's a different emotional game because it isn't about the bottom line, right? You can make a lot of business decisions based on the bottom line. And universities, as neoliberal as they are, the bottom line isn't exactly what drives a lot of the decision making, right? So thinking of a model for you as a leader in higher education What might that look like? How might you tackle this job of being a leader, sort of an entry-level leader, and not being crushed by it and feeling effective in it? And this is a challenge that I work with a lot of my clients on. So a mindful way forward in this position for you. First thing is get in touch with your values. What do you care about? What is non-negotiable? Where is your North Star? Because you're going to need a really solid measuring tape against which to measure your decisions, to rank your decisions. And after you've gotten in touch with your values, and you may need a sounding board for this, you may need to journal on this, you may want a coach for this, you may want, a series of heart-to-heart talks over coffee with a friend, a trusted ally on this, getting in touch with your values. What is going to lead you? What's your North Star? The next thing you need to look for is alignment within your department. You can't do this all by yourself. You can't carry the burden all by yourself. Can't do all the work by yourself. So who shares your values? With whom can you craft a vision for the department, right? Who is a natural ally? And I don't want to say ally in the sense of you're going to war, but it's important to feel that you're not in this all alone. So who has your back? And having your back and being supportive, right? That has a lot to do with shared values. Then, depending on how big your department is, how well it is functioning when you step into that role, how are you crafting your vision, right? Is your department an incredibly active and interactive department that wants to sit down together every few years and hash out some priorities and a way forward and the big things that we're working on? Or is this a new thought for your department and you would be the first person to say, hey, it is probably important for us, looking at the university or the college's strategic plan, looking at where we are, to say, with the human assets we have, right? So with our staff and with our students, with the resources we have and can get, what might success look like? How might we judge our health and success as a department? Right? Is that enrollment? Is it research funding? Is it retention? Like, what are your success metrics? And what does the department want to be known for on campus and within the discipline? And have a discussion around that. That is sometimes challenging in an incredibly fractured and fractious department. But if you have a healthy department, those are great conversations to have, because it helps then you in the leadership role and the people in the department to engage in some prioritization. Because especially when you enter a leadership role and you receive a lot more email and a lot more input, being able to triage for what hits the priority list and what doesn't is really important. And if you're doing that all on your own, this is part of sort of that crushing burden that the chairship can feel like. If you feel like that most of your department is in line with you, then that burden gets distributed a little bit emotionally and can get distributed actually in work as well. So when you're thinking about setting a direction for the department, depending on the size of it, depending on the health of it, depending on the interpersonal strength of the department, you might say, okay, what are we currently known for? Do we want to shift that? How are we currently doing? Do we want to shift that, right? And then with some answers to that, maybe you can set, here's what a solid win would look like in the next couple of years. Here's what sort of a stretch goal might look like. And here's the bare minimum. So you can play a little bit with this impact that you want to have as a chair, any kind of movement you want to drive. You can gear that to how fertile is the soil that you're tilling at this point. I'm just going to mix metaphors all over the place. But if you're collaborating with a really healthy department, what might you set as things that you can all work towards, things that will benefit all of you? A rising tide lifts all boats, that sort of thing. And if it isn't that healthy, what might the bare bones improvement be for getting the department back on track, according to you or according to the larger institution. So you're looking for measures of success. And in those measures of success, you cannot do all things this year, and you maybe can't fix it all ever, because the system continues to really slowly continue to change. Demographics change. We had a pandemic in there that took everybody's beautiful plans and hucked them out the window. So thinking in terms of priorities and what would be important first, and thinking in terms of discrete work that can get done, as opposed to saying we're just going to start all over and build it again and fix everything that I have noticed over the last 5 years is broken, right? That urge to come in and solve the problems that you've seen, temper that first with, okay, who am I as a leader? How am I going to show up according to my values? Who's here with me? How do we collectively create something that most of us buy into? And that may sound incredibly simplistic, but what I've come to learn in working with a fair number of chairs is that a lot of institutions don't do any sort of onboarding for their chairs. Or if you do, if you get a how to be a chair weekend or training prior to taking the role, I've learned that there's a lot of budget spreadsheets, teaching timetables, crisis management, like that's what the job of the chair can feel like a lot of the time is crisis management. And then there's all of the annual faculty mentorship and faculty review process and all of that. So there's like the business of the university that the chair is involved in. But that is very different from the business of people that the chair is involved in. And that will be unique to your department and to you, because it's managing yourself, right? What does it mean to be a leader of peers, right? Because you're not the boss, but you are a leader and you're a conduit to the dean's office and you're a conduit to the rest of campus. So how are you inhabiting that role? Where are you going to get in your own way there? How might your emotions need to get managed there, right? Your anger or your eagerness to please, or your frustration or your confusion, or your cynicism, or whatever it is, right? How might those things need to be managed? And then how are you going to engage in the acts of diplomacy and influence that you need to engage in order to be effective in your role? So there's influence, there's self-management, there's emotional, social intelligence, and those things don't show up in the chair's boot camp, even if you get one, okay? So briefly, if you are finding yourself in this kind of a role, number one, lead yourself, right? You want to act with intention instead of reactivity, and that starts inside. Number two, prioritize. You cannot be all things to all people. Your department cannot be all things to all people. What is most important? Third, be okay with not being everybody's cup of tea. And that's a hard one, especially if you're the woman I described at the outset of this podcast episode, who's been really successful and then been tapped because you're a good person. What happens when you disappoint people, right? When people pleasing goes wrong and you're no longer pleasing people, how's that going to land with you? How might it surprise others? Be okay with that. And four, in order to do all of that, because it really is like, this is a big opportunity to grow as a person. Who do you have by your side? And I think in addition to having allies on campus and people who get you on campus, you need to have a neutral sounding board. So whether you have a colleague at another institution that you meet monthly with over Zoom and coffee to exchange insights and to be a check on each other, whether you have a spouse who understands your work and enjoys processing this with you and being a check on what's going on, or whether you work with a coach, one-on-one or in a group, to say, okay, this is what I think is happening and this is how I'm working. Do I sound crazy? Or why is it this hard or whatever? Because you will notice, like, you moving into the chair role means that you leave the peer role behind. And so your need for that kind of community shifts and changes. That's what I've got for you today. If you have questions or comments, Jennifer@jenniferaskey.com. I look so forward to hearing from you, and I will be back again in your earbuds soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mindful Academy podcast. For questions about this episode, suggestions for future episodes, or to request a consultation with me, email me at jennifer@jenniferaskey.com. This episode was recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 lands. The songs included in the intro and outro for this podcast are Heartache by Silent Partner and Piano Store by Jimmy Fontanez of Media Right Productions, both sourced through the audio library. Thank you so much for listening.